In the year 2125, humanity had conquered the stars. It wasn't the massive fleets of warships or the advanced weapons technology that gave them an edge, it was their boundless will to adapt and thrive in the face of any adversity. They had overcome the harsh conditions of the Moon, then Mars, and soon their colonies stretched out to the asteroid belts and beyond. However, as they ventured deeper into the vast expanse of space, they discovered that they were not the only sentient species roaming the stars. The galactic community, composed of various alien civilizations, had long regarded humanity as a fledgling race, too primitive, too chaotic, too unpredictable. But the humans' relentless determination caught the attention of the established powers. They were too resourceful to ignore, too bold to be contained. It started with a series of trade negotiations. Earth had developed powerful AI-driven technologies and was offering them to neighboring systems in exchange for resources. At first, it seemed like a typical deal among galactic players. But soon, the humans began to outsmart even the most seasoned diplomats and strategists in the galaxy. The old systems and alliances were being tested, and some alien leaders saw it as an opportunity to exploit humanity's hunger for power. But no one anticipated the magnitude of the shift that would occur. It began on the icy world of Ilex, a remote outpost at the edge of the human-controlled regions. Here, a daring young officer named Captain Aurelia Graves and her crew made the first decisive move that would alter the fate of humankind. They were sent on a mission to safeguard a resource-rich moon from a pirate alliance that had been destabilizing nearby trade routes. The pirates, who were a mix of cruel alien species and deserters from the galactic powers, were known for their ferocity and cunning. They weren't the type to negotiate, they took what they wanted, by force if necessary. Captain Graves and her crew didn't back down. With a combination of superior tactics, a clever use of stealth technology, and sheer willpower, they inflicted a crushing defeat on the pirate forces. When the pirates attempted to retreat, the humans chased them, proving to the galaxy that humanity would not simply accept the status quo. They were not afraid to go to war to protect their future. News of this victory spread like wildfire, catching the attention of the galactic powers who had previously underestimated humanity. But it was not just the victory itself that caused the ripple effect. Captain Graves and her crew had captured a heavily encrypted data core from the pirate leader. It contained secrets of the ancient Galactic Throne, an artifact said to grant unimaginable power to its possessor. The throne, once owned by the founders of the Galactic Alliance, had been lost to history, and its existence had long been considered a myth by most scholars. Yet, according to the data, the throne's influence was still being felt across the galaxy in subtle ways, manipulating the political dynamics and dictating the actions of the greatest powers. The discovery was a game-changer. For the first time, humanity had a direct path to something far more important than mere resources or trade routes. It could be the key to controlling the galaxy itself. The news spread quickly, from the back channels of secretive governments to the holographic broadcasts that beamed across every human colony. The discovery of the Galactic Throne had suddenly made the human race a major player on the galactic stage. Within months, a vast alliance of human factions, from the powerful Earth Central Command to the rogue colonies on the outer edges of the galaxy, began to consolidate power. They realized that humanity, with its unity and ambition, could challenge the long-standing galactic order. They began to call it the Human Imperium, a new dawn for a species that had only recently been dismissed as insignificant. But not all factions within the human ranks agreed on how to proceed. Some believed that humanity should rise to power through diplomacy, forging alliances and strengthening their place among the stars. Others saw the potential for dominance, and they were willing to go to any lengths to claim the throne for themselves. The first cracks in the unity of the human race began to form, setting the stage for the internal struggles that would shape the Imperium's future. In the shadow of this newfound power, a looming threat arose, an ancient alien race known only as the Sentinels. The Sentinels had once ruled the galaxy, but they had retreated into the unknown regions of space centuries ago, their empire crumbled and forgotten. Now, they were returning, drawn by the stirrings of the Galactic Throne and the rise of the Human Imperium. They would not let the humans, those young and reckless beings, claim the mantle of galactic dominance. Captain Graves, now a rising star in the Human Imperium, knew that humanity's path forward would not be easy. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with power struggles and ancient secrets. But one thing was certain: the rise of the Human Imperium would not be stopped. The galaxy would have to reckon with humanity, for better or for worse. And the stars would never shine the same way again. The first signs of tension within the Human Imperium were subtle. Minor disputes over territory and resources, the sort of conflicts that could easily be dismissed as typical growing pains for an expanding empire. But beneath the surface, darker forces were at play, forces that had been awakened by the discovery of the Galactic Throne. Captain Aurelia Graves, now promoted to admiral, had been thrust into the heart of the Imperium's political struggles. While her military genius was respected by her superiors, she was not immune to the rising tides of ambition and dissent within her own ranks. The discovery of the throne had emboldened those who saw it as humanity's rightful inheritance. For them, the path to power lay in forging an empire that stretched across the stars, one where humanity ruled not as equals among other species, but as its undisputed masters. Graves, however, had a different vision. She believed in unity and diplomacy, in bringing the galaxy together to prevent another bloodbath. But that vision was becoming harder to sustain, especially as various factions within the Imperium began to push for more aggressive expansion. The inner circle of the Imperium's ruling council was divided. One faction, led by the charismatic General Victor Rylan, advocated for total war against the alien powers, believing that humanity's destiny was to crush all opposition and claim the throne by force. The other, led by Chancellor Alira Durant, urged restraint and diplomatic engagement, hoping to secure humanity's position through alliances rather than bloodshed. As the political infighting raged, an unexpected event set the stage for the first major fracture. During a routine patrol mission on the border of the human-controlled sector, a human warship, the Perseverance, came across a small fleet of alien ships, an exploratory fleet of the ancient Sentinels. The Sentinels, who had been missing for centuries, were thought to have disappeared beyond the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But their return was imminent, and their presence, though small, was enough to send shockwaves throughout the Imperium. The Perseverance's captain, a young and ambitious officer named Captain Alaric Dre, took a bold step. Ignoring orders to report back and await higher command, he engaged the Sentinel fleet. The ensuing battle, though brief, was devastating. The human ships, though technologically advanced, were no match for the superior Sentinel vessels, which displayed an unsettling mix of ancient weapons and psychic abilities. The Perseverance was destroyed, and only a few survivors managed to escape. Dre's decision to engage the Sentinels without provocation sent shockwaves through the Imperium. It was seen by many as a reckless display of human pride, a dangerous step toward war with a race that had once ruled the galaxy. Admiral Graves, who had been entrusted with the Imperium's military strategy, was forced to confront the political fallout. General Ryland saw it as an opportunity. He believed the Imperium needed to strike first, to seize the initiative before the Sentinels could reorganize and pose a greater threat. His faction grew stronger, feeding off the chaos that Dre's actions had stirred. Chancellor Durant, however, saw the incident as a disaster. She feared that war with the Sentinels would not only spell the end of the Imperium's fragile unity, but would lead to the extinction of humanity itself. She called for a diplomatic approach, negotiation, a formal recognition of the Sentinels as a powerful entity in the galaxy, and an offer of alliance. The debate between these factions escalated into a full-blown political crisis, and in the absence of consensus, the Imperium's central government splintered. The Human Imperium was no longer united under one banner. Admiral Graves found herself in a precarious position. She had once believed that the Imperium could unite under a common cause, but now she was caught between two powerful factions, each with their own vision for humanity's future. She had the loyalty of her fleet, but her voice was drowned out by the political power plays happening behind closed doors. As the rift deepened, the Imperium's military was fractured, with some of its forces loyal to General Ryland's expansionist vision, while others, including Graves' own forces, remained loyal to Chancellor Durant's more cautious approach. The galaxy began to take notice. The alien powers, who had once underestimated humanity's potential, now saw the Imperium as a volatile, unpredictable force. The Sentinels, meanwhile, were not idle. Their small fleet had retreated to a distant star system, but their scouts were already probing human territory, and rumors began to circulate that they were preparing for something much larger. The first true battle between human factions occurred on the fringe of the Imperium, where the human colony world of Seraphis stood on the line between General Ryland's domain and Chancellor Durant's supporters. The world was rich in resources and strategically important. Its possession would tilt the balance of power in favor of either side. As Admiral Graves prepared her forces to intervene and prevent bloodshed, she was forced to confront a hard truth: the Imperium could no longer hold together through diplomacy alone. The rise of the Human Imperium had given birth to a new age of ambition, but it had also fractured humanity's unity. The rise of the human race would not come without sacrifice. The galaxy was watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. Would humanity unite against the coming threat, or would the human race tear itself apart before it could even truly begin its rise to power? The battle for Seraphis had begun. The once thriving human colony was now the battleground for a new and dangerous chapter in the history of the Human Imperium. Admiral Aurelia Graves, leading her fleet of loyalists, had arrived just in time to see General Victor Ryland's forces clash with the forces loyal to Chancellor Alira Durant. The sky above Seraphis, usually calm and unremarkable, was now filled with the flashing lights of weaponized ships, explosions, and the haunting sound of combat. Seraphis itself, a lush planet brimming with life, was about to bear the brunt of humanity's internal strife. The once peaceful world had become a symbol of everything humanity had hoped to avoid: a civil war fought not against alien invaders, but within their own ranks. Admiral Graves, with her fleet of seasoned veterans, desperately tried to intervene, sending a message to both sides urging them to stand down. But it was too late. The factions had already drawn their lines in the sand, and they would not be swayed by the pleas of one officer, no matter how respected she was. The human fleet engaged in a brutal, high-speed skirmish in the atmosphere above Seraphis, with advanced warships diving through clouds and firing precision beams of energy at one another. The destruction was widespread, with entire regions of the planet's surface being scorched by the fallout from their weapons. Graves, though determined to avoid further bloodshed, had a difficult choice to make: order her ships to fight, risking the collapse of the Imperium's military unity, or withdraw and allow the battle to play out, knowing it would solidify General Ryland's faction's grip on power. As much as it pained her, the decision was clear: if the Imperium was to survive, it had to act swiftly. With a heart full of sorrow and a mind steeled for the worst, Graves ordered her ships to engage the forces loyal to Ryland, narrowly avoiding a full-scale collapse of her fleet's coordination. The battle was fierce and, despite being outnumbered, Graves' forces fought with a level of unity that Ryland's faction lacked. The efficiency of her tactics, coupled with the unwavering loyalty of her crews, allowed her to seize control of several key strategic positions above Seraphis, forcing the general's forces to retreat. Yet, the victory came at a heavy cost. The human losses were staggering, and Seraphis itself had been irreparably damaged by the ongoing war. Whole cities lay in ruin, and the death toll among civilians was uncountable. As Graves surveyed the battlefield, she couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility. This conflict was not just about power, it was about the future of humanity, and that future was now uncertain. The political ramifications were immediate. The Imperium, once an idea of unity and strength, was now irrevocably divided. Chancellor Durant, horrified by the collateral damage, insisted that Graves take control of the remnants of the planet's political leadership. She declared that General Ryland had overstepped his bounds and that his faction had broken the peace beyond repair. The war had begun in earnest, and it would be a war for humanity's soul. Meanwhile, in the heart of the galaxy, the alien powers that had been watching humanity's rise with increasing wariness were now growing bolder. The Zorith, an ancient reptilian species with vast intelligence networks, saw the fractured state of the Human Imperium as an opportunity to make their move. Their fleet, sleek and deadly, began a campaign of border skirmishes against human colonies along the edge of the Imperium's domain. The Sentinels, sensing the unrest among humanity, remained silent but watchful, their ancient fleet building in the deep reaches of the galaxy, preparing for an eventual confrontation. The Sentinels, who had once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, were not to be underestimated. Though they had retreated from the known universe for centuries, their ancient technology and psychic prowess made them a force to be reckoned with. What they sought, however, was not just war, it was the reclamation of the Galactic Throne, a throne now sought by humanity, a throne that could potentially grant supreme power to whoever sat upon it. Admiral Graves knew that humanity's civil war had inadvertently placed them in the crosshairs of the galaxy's oldest and most dangerous entities. She was faced with an agonizing decision. Should she push for a lasting peace within humanity and risk the galaxy's powers consuming them, or should she rally the fractured factions of the Imperium and face the rising alien threats head-on, despite the deep divisions among her people? On the fringes of the Imperium, a new voice emerged. A charismatic leader from the rogue colonies, Captain Jackson Vaughan, a former military officer and visionary, called for unity above all else. His message was simple: we must stand together, or we will fall apart. The human colonies, scattered far and wide across the galaxy, were ripe for rebellion, and many looked to Vaughan as a potential leader to guide them through the growing chaos. As General Ryland fortified his position, planning for the next stage of the war, and Chancellor Durant worked tirelessly to hold the remnants of the Imperium together, Admiral Graves found herself torn between the impossible task of reconciliation and the dire need to prepare humanity for the challenges ahead. The threat of alien invasion, both from the Zorath and the Sentinels, loomed over them like a gathering storm. The rise of the Human Imperium had been swift, but now, for the first time, humanity was confronted with the full extent of the galaxy's dangers. The war for Seraphis had shown them what they were capable of, but it also showed them what they stood to lose. And the true battle for the future of humanity was only just beginning. In the aftermath of the battle for Seraphis, the Human Imperium found itself fractured. The battle had not only decimated a significant portion of the fleet but also strained the unity between the various factions. The stakes had escalated, humanity was now on the precipice of becoming a true galactic power, but it was also teetering on the edge of total collapse. The war for dominance among the human factions was just as fierce as the external threats looming on the horizon. Admiral Aurelia Graves, although victorious in the short term, found herself increasingly isolated. The once loyal officers who had followed her through every battle were now at odds with the growing faction of General Victor Ryland's supporters. Ryland, emboldened by his military successes, began rallying his forces with the promise of a human empire that would crush its enemies and establish humanity as the supreme power in the galaxy. His influence was spreading across the human colonies, feeding into the growing resentment of the perceived weakness in Chancellor Durant's leadership. Durant, meanwhile, clung to her belief in diplomacy and unity, but she was fighting a losing battle. The civilians in her faction were becoming disillusioned, and more systems were defecting to Ryland's cause. To make matters worse, the Zorath, an ancient reptilian species with an insidious intelligence network, began to push deeper into human-controlled space. The Zorath fleet, though smaller than the combined strength of the Imperium, was highly organized and ruthlessly efficient. They sought to destabilize humanity's fragile unity and exploit the chaos for their own benefit, testing the resolve of the human factions. On the political front, Chancellor Durant found herself unable to maintain the delicate balance. In secret meetings held on the capital world of Terra, she discussed the growing threat with her closest allies. "If we do not act swiftly, we will be consumed from within," she said, her voice heavy with the burden of leadership. She had always believed that humanity's strength lay in its ability to unite, but now it seemed like the fractures within the Imperium were too deep to mend without bloodshed. It was in the midst of these darkening days that a new, unexpected figure rose to challenge the course of humanity. Captain Jackson Vaughan, the rogue leader from the outer colonies, had been steadily gaining support from the more independent-minded colonies that had long resented the centralized authority of Terra. Vaughan's charisma and promises of a more decentralized and egalitarian empire resonated with those who felt ignored by the power struggles of the inner systems. Vaughan's message was clear: humanity must not repeat the mistakes of the past. We do not need an empire built on conquest and fear, we need a future where every colony, every world, has a voice. His followers, growing in number, began to form an alliance of independent worlds, and it wasn't long before they had a fleet of their own. Vorn's coalition was not a large military force, but it was a powerful political movement, and it was threatening to take control of key human-held sectors. He wanted peace, but peace on his terms, and that meant dismantling the centralized rule of the Imperium and creating a new order, one where local leaders would decide their own fate. Admiral Graves, who had long admired Vorn's vision of a united human race, found herself torn. On one hand, Vorn's ideals of equality and cooperation spoke to the heart of her own beliefs. On the other hand, his approach was fracturing the already weakened Imperium at a time when it desperately needed unity. Yet the growing alien threats could not be ignored. The Zoroth, whose tactical brilliance was evident in their recent raids, were rapidly expanding across the Outer Rim, taking advantage of the internal strife within humanity's borders. They had no intention of merely testing humanity's defenses, they aimed to dominate the human colonies and establish a foothold from which they could further destabilize the Imperium. At the same time, the Sentinels, the mysterious and ancient race that had once ruled the galaxy, were stirring in the far reaches of space. They had watched humanity's rise with interest, but now, with the Imperium in disarray, their ancient leaders, who had been in deep stasis for millennia, began to awaken. They had once been the undisputed masters of the galaxy, and the galactic throne that humanity now sought was a symbol of the lost dominion they once held. The Sentinels were ready to reclaim what they believed was their birthright, and they would not allow any upstart species, no matter how powerful, to stand in their way. The Imperium's future seemed uncertain, and even those within its ranks were unsure of which direction they should go. In the midst of this chaos, Admiral Graves knew that a decision had to be made. Would she join forces with Vorn and risk splintering humanity even further, or would she continue to back Chancellor Durant's vision of a united Imperium, knowing that its current fragility might lead to its destruction? Time was running out. The Zoroth were advancing, and the Sentinels were no longer an ancient myth, they were returning to reclaim the galaxy. The fractures within humanity had created a dangerous void, and the galaxy's ancient powers were ready to fill it with their own dominance. In the distance, far beyond the Imperium's borders, a new force was emerging. It was not human, nor was it purely alien. It was something else entirely, an ancient entity with power beyond comprehension. And it was watching humanity, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the war raged on and new alliances formed and shattered, one thing was clear: the galaxy was about to witness a reckoning. The rise of the Human Imperium would not be without great cost. And in the end, only one truth remained: only the strongest would survive. The galaxy trembled as humanity's internal divisions grew sharper. The war for Seraphis had been a spark, but now it was a raging inferno. The factions within the Human Imperium, led by Admiral Graves, General Rylan, Chancellor Durant, and the rogue leader Captain Vorn, each had their own vision for the future. Some desired unity at any cost, others sought an empire built on strength and fear, while a growing number advocated for decentralization and independence. The galaxy was watching, but all of humanity was ensnared in a battle that threatened to consume everything they had worked for. Admiral Aurelia Graves found herself more isolated than ever. Though her military victories had made her a symbol of hope for those who believed in a unified human race, she could no longer maintain the delicate balance of diplomacy and force. Her loyalty to Chancellor Durant had been unwavering, but with the Zoroth encroaching upon the Imperium's borders and Vorn's faction making significant political gains, she knew that the war within humanity was escalating to a point where unity could no longer hold. Her influence within the Imperium's leadership was weakening, and the situation had become dire. The first blow to humanity's fragile unity came from within the capital itself. Chancellor Durant, facing mounting pressure from both within and outside her faction, was assassinated. The identity of the assassin was a mystery, though suspicion immediately fell on General Rylan, whose forces had already begun to consolidate power in the Outer Rim. But the truth was more complex. Durant's assassination was not the work of a single person, but a coordinated plot involving multiple factions, each seeking to control the future of the Imperium. With Durant gone, the political power vacuum was immediate. The Imperium's council, once a bastion of cooperation, fractured into warring factions, each jockeying for dominance. General Ryland's supporters saw it as the perfect opportunity to strike, and they moved quickly to seize control of key planetary systems. Ryland himself, a man who had once advocated for unity through strength, was now a figurehead of an expanding military junta. His vision for the Imperium had shifted from the desire for conquest to one of total domination, with no room for dissent. Meanwhile, Captain Jackson Vaughan's coalition of independent colonies, those worlds that had long been on the periphery of the Imperium's reach, declared independence in the wake of Durant's death. Vaughan's followers, many of whom had grown disillusioned with the central authority of Terra, began to rally around the banner of self-determination, their forces gaining strength by the day. Vaughan, though still a man of ideals, realized that the path to peace for humanity was no longer through diplomacy, it was through the creation of a new order, one in which every colony had control over its own fate. Admiral Graves, torn between loyalty to her fallen chancellor and the knowledge that the Imperium could not survive in its current form, began to question her role in the unfolding chaos. She knew that the galaxy's threats were far too great to ignore. The Zorith were no longer just raiders on the fringe, they had begun striking at the heart of the human colonies, their intelligence networks stretching further than anyone had realized. Their forces were moving systematically, targeting resource-rich systems and undermining the Imperium's ability to respond. The Sentinels, who had remained silent in the wake of the Imperium's rise, were no longer content to watch. The time had come for them to reclaim what they believed was their right. The Galactic Throne, the symbol of ultimate power in the galaxy, was drawing them in like moths to a flame. The Sentinels had watched as humanity's ambition grew, and now they sought to extinguish it before it could challenge their own ancient dominion. As the factions of humanity began to take up arms against each other, the galaxy's ancient powers sensed an opportunity. The Zorith began their full-scale invasion of the Outer Rim, their fleets attacking human colonies without warning, while the Sentinels moved ever closer to the heart of the Imperium, their ancient technology and psychic powers threatening to tear apart everything humanity had built. Admiral Graves knew that time was running out. She had fought for unity, but it had become clear that humanity was too divided to stand together. She could no longer wait for the political infighting to resolve itself. There was only one option left, to unite the fractured remnants of the Imperium under her banner and take the fight to the galaxy's ancient powers. She called for a final meeting of the Imperium's remaining leadership, those who had not already pledged their allegiance to Ryland, Vaughan, or the remnants of Durant's supporters. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to form an alliance that could stand against the Zorith and the Sentinels. The room was filled with tension as representatives from every corner of the Imperium gathered, each with their own agenda. The weight of the decision was palpable, this was humanity's last chance at survival. Admiral Graves stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with the sorrow of everything that had been lost. Humanity stands at a crossroads, she began. We are divided, yes, but we cannot afford to let these divisions be our undoing. The Zorith and the Sentinels are coming, and they will not hesitate to wipe us from existence. If we do not act now, everything we have built will be for nothing. The room fell silent. It was clear that Graves' words carried weight. For the first time in a long while, the leadership of the Imperium was united, if only for a fleeting moment, by the realization that the galaxy's ancient powers would not wait for humanity to sort out its internal strife. If they did not act, humanity's future would be extinguished before it even had a chance to shine. And so, the final war for humanity's survival began, not just against the alien invaders, but against the very factions that had once stood together under the banner of the Imperium. The galaxy was about to witness the rise, or fall, of the Human Imperium, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The galaxy had already begun to feel the tremors of a war unlike any other. The Zorith, relentless and precise, continued their advances into human space, targeting weak points in the Imperium's outer territories. While the fractured human factions bickered over the future, the reptilian invaders showed no mercy, raising colonies and dismantling any resistance in their path. Their ships, sleek and deadly, tore through the defenses of the human fleet, leaving little in their wake but smoldering wreckage and desolation. The Sentinels, ancient and enigmatic, had awakened fully, and their fleet moved with purpose. They were more than a military force, they were a psychic and technological force, wielding powers that transcended any known human technology. Their goal was clear: to reclaim the Galactic Throne and reassert their control over the galaxy. To them, humanity's rise had been an aberration, an upstart species that dared to dream of becoming the next galactic rulers. The Sentinels would not allow it. They were the true inheritors of the throne, and they would stop at nothing to crush humanity's ambitions. Within the Imperium, the final attempt at unity had crumbled. Admiral Aurelia Graves, realizing the desperate nature of the situation, had called for a meeting of the remaining leaders of humanity, hoping to rally them against the coming storm. But the political reality was too entrenched, and the factions could not find common ground. General Victor Rylan, whose ambitions had always been rooted in strength and conquest, had already seized control of key systems, declaring himself the de facto leader of the Imperium's military forces. His forces were well organized, and his soldiers loyal to a fault. His claim to power was undeniable, at least to his supporters. Captain Jackson Vaughan, the rogue leader of the independent colonies, had built an alliance of his own. His followers, disillusioned by the central authority of Terra, saw Vaughan as their savior, their path to true freedom. His vision was one of decentralized governance, where each colony could determine its own future. But Vaughan's coalition had its own problems. Factions within it were already clashing over the balance of power, and Vaughan's ideals, noble as they were, could not bridge the deep divisions within his own ranks. The death of Chancellor Durant had fractured the last semblance of unity among the humans. No one could fill her shoes, and no leader could command the loyalty of the Imperium's fractured systems. The once mighty Imperium, a beacon of hope for a united humanity, had become a shadow of its former self, a fragmented empire that could barely hold its own against the growing threats from the galaxy's ancient powers. And yet, Admiral Graves, desperate to hold on to the ideals of unity, refused to surrender. She called for one final stand, hoping to unite the fractured remnants of humanity before it was too late. But even she knew that the situation had grown grim. The Imperium had lost its cohesion, and the forces that sought to destroy humanity were closing in. The Zorith fleet had begun its march toward the capital world of Terra, and the Sentinels' fleet was not far behind. The time for diplomacy had passed. Now, the galaxy would see whether humanity's survival was possible. As Graves worked tirelessly to rally the remaining loyalists, General Ryland's forces began a brutal campaign to wipe out the last pockets of resistance. His military strategy was simple: crush the opposition swiftly and decisively, leaving no room for negotiation. Ryland was no diplomat, he was a conqueror, and his methods reflected that. His soldiers swept through the colonies, burning everything in their path, and his message was clear: submit, or face total annihilation. Meanwhile, Captain Vaughan, ever the idealist, began to rally his forces for a final push toward independence. His followers, emboldened by his vision of a new order, prepared to strike at the heart of the Imperium. They would not bend to the will of Ryland or anyone else. The coalition was small, but its zeal was unmatched. They believed that the future of humanity could only be secured by tearing down the old system and replacing it with something entirely new. But the true test came when the Zorith fleet, having successfully bypassed the defenses of the Outer Rim, made its move toward Terra. The reptilian invaders had no intention of negotiating with the fractured Imperium. They had already decided that humanity was a threat to their plans for galactic dominance. Their fleet, now bolstered by new technology scavenged from the ruins of human colonies, was overwhelming. Their tactics were brutal, and their soldiers, with their heightened senses and deadly weaponry, tore through human defenses with ease. Admiral Graves, understanding the gravity of the situation, made a final, desperate plea. She contacted General Ryland and Captain Vaughan, hoping to at least forge a temporary alliance between the human factions. The Zorith threat was too great, and their forces too powerful to ignore. But the response she received was less than hopeful. Ryland, his forces now too entrenched in their campaign, refused to divert his attention from the war of conquest he had begun. His belief in the need for total control was unwavering, and the idea of teaming up with the very forces that had once opposed him was out of the question. Vaughan, though more sympathetic to Graves' plea, faced opposition from within his own ranks. The independent colonies had already taken up arms to defend themselves against Ryland's advances, and Vorn's vision for a new order was at odds with the desperate need for a unified defense. His followers saw the Imperium as a broken, corrupt system, and they were unwilling to sacrifice their ideals for the sake of survival. As the Zoreth fleet arrived at the capital, the final confrontation began. The streets of Terra, once a symbol of humanity's power and unity, were now under siege. The Zoreth forces, with their superior technology and ruthless tactics, fought their way through the capital, raising entire districts in their wake. The Imperium's defenders were overwhelmed, unable to withstand the sheer might of the alien invaders. In the final moments of the battle, Admiral Graves and the remaining leaders of humanity watched helplessly as Terra fell. The Imperium, fractured beyond repair, was no more. Humanity had lost its chance at a unified future, its hopes of a galactic empire shattered by the weight of its own divisions. And as the Zoreth raised their flag above the ruins of Terra, the galaxy seemed to turn its gaze toward the new order, an order that would not be human. But the story of humanity was not over. For in the darkest hours, when all seemed lost, a glimmer of resistance remained. A single, fragile thread that could yet bring the fractured remnants of humanity together, and perhaps, just perhaps, ignite the fires of rebellion once again. The fall of Terra was a devastating blow to humanity. The once thriving capital, now reduced to ashes under the relentless assault of the Zoreth, was a symbol of the Imperium's downfall. The shattered fleets that had once stood as the pride of humanity now limped in scattered, isolated groups, their commanders weary, their ships damaged. The galaxy watched as the once great human empire crumbled, the invaders moving to consolidate their power. But amidst the despair, humanity was not yet defeated. The remnants of the human race were scattered across the galaxy, hiding in the shadows of a fallen empire, but they were not without hope. There were still pockets of resistance, and from these embers, a new future would be born. Admiral Aurelia Graves, having barely escaped the destruction of Terra, knew that humanity's survival could not rely on past allegiances or old political structures. She had failed to prevent the fracture of the Imperium, but she was determined not to let humanity fall into extinction. As the Zoreth forces secured their hold on Terra and the Sentinels observed from afar, she knew that a different kind of war needed to be waged, a war not just for survival, but for the very soul of humanity. In the deep recesses of human space, a network of underground resistance movements had quietly begun to form. These were not military factions, but civilian collectives, scientists, engineers, and former diplomats, all united by a single cause, the rebirth of humanity. They had seen the potential of the human spirit, the strength to rise again from the ashes, to forge a new destiny in a galaxy that had long underestimated them. And they had a vision of a galaxy where humanity would no longer be fragmented or ruled by authoritarian power, but united by a shared belief in freedom and cooperation. Admiral Graves made contact with these resistance groups, and they quickly formed the Alliance for Human Rebirth, AHR, a decentralized collective that would oppose the Zoreth, the Sentinels, and any force that sought to enslave humanity. But it was not an easy path. Many of the surviving human colonies were still divided, unsure of the AHR's vision, and some had already come under the influence of the Zoreth or other alien factions. Vorn's coalition, still strong, had splintered further, with some factions calling for direct confrontation with the invaders, while others continued to argue for a more peaceful resolution. At the heart of the AHR was a new philosophy, one that drew on humanity's greatest strengths, resilience, adaptability, and the belief that a single individual could change the course of history. It was a philosophy built on the lessons of the past, one that recognized the mistakes of the Imperium but rejected the idea that humanity's failure was inevitable. The war that followed was not one of grand, sweeping battles like the wars of the past. Instead, it was a war of sabotage, guerrilla tactics, and covert operations. The AHR struck at the heart of Zoreth-controlled territories, disrupting supply lines, liberating colonies, and slowly rebuilding humanity's fighting force. It was a war of ideas as much as military might, spreading the message that humanity's true strength lay not in dominance but in unity and shared purpose. Meanwhile, the Sentinels, aware of the growing resistance, prepared for their own return to power. They had long seen the galaxy as their domain, and they believed that humanity's rise was a mere accident of history. Their fleets moved, not with haste, but with an inexorable sense of inevitability, and their agents infiltrated human space, seeking to sow discord among the resistance. But humanity's greatest weapon was the very thing that had led to its downfall, its diversity. No longer bound by the rigid structures of the Imperium, the surviving human factions were free to innovate, to form new alliances, and to adapt. Graves, Vorn, and even the reluctant Rylan, realizing the gravity of the threat posed by the Sentinels and the Zoroth, began to see the value in cooperation. Former enemies now stood together in a common cause, one that transcended personal ambition, one that called on the better angels of humanity's nature. The AHR's success was not without sacrifice. Many lives were lost in the fight for freedom, and the Zoroth responded to every rebellion with brutal reprisals. Yet, the more the resistance grew, the more it became clear, humanity was not finished. The Imperium, for all its glory and its failures, had laid the groundwork for something far more powerful, a unified humanity, built not on conquest but on a shared vision of freedom. And in the shadows, the galaxy's ancient powers began to take notice. The Zoroth, once so confident in their victory, now found themselves facing a new kind of enemy, one that could adapt and learn, one that fought not for territory, but for the preservation of its identity. The Sentinels, whose ancient powers had once seemed unstoppable, found themselves challenged by a force they had never expected, the human will to survive. As the resistance spread, more and more human colonies joined the cause. The AHR's ships, though small, grew in number, and their influence spread like wildfire. In the heart of the human territories, Admiral Graves, once a symbol of a fractured imperium, now stood as the figurehead of a new human revolution. Her message was simple, but powerful: we will not bow to the old powers. We are humanity, and we will rise again. The galaxy, once certain that humanity's time had come and gone, now found itself on the precipice of a new era. The Zoroth, the Sentinels, and all who had once thought of humanity as an insignificant species now realized the truth: they had underestimated humanity. In the ruins of Terra, beneath the shadows of its former glory, a new flame of hope burned bright. Humanity, though battered and broken, had not only survived, it was beginning to rise once more.